Hello and welcome to a very impromptu video here on Back of the Net. And this morning, the club accounts were released. And let's face it, on the surface, they do make grim reading, but there is reason for it. Whilst they are fairly similar to other Premier League club accounts last season, I'm sure that fans will have a number of questions with regards to the investment going forward. The extremely high percentage of wages versus turnover, that's a concern. And also the growing debt that our club seems to accrue. So we've tried to gauge the reaction on Twitter this morning, and we'll discuss some of the key points of what we have learned. To do this with me, we have got Jeff Hayward. Jeff, how are you?
Fine, thank you, Sam.
Cracking interview with Danny Hollands last night. Really enjoyed it. You and Neil did a great job.
Yeah, lovely bloke. Really good fun.
Excellent. And here is said Neil Dawson. Neil, how's it going?
Yeah, very good, Sam. Very good.
Cool. So on this show, there's a chance to reflect also on the recent minutes that have been released after the board-to-board meeting between AFCB and the Cherries Trust, with many fans feeling that some of the answers that were provided were less than satisfactory. So on this show, we're going to break down the responses, detangle the various sound bites, and work out where we go from here. So in short, with regards to the accounts this morning, these are the headlines that you need to be looking at. So AFC Bournemouth have registered a £60 million loss, nearly double of what it was in the last financial year. The impact of COVID, of course, cannot be underestimated, worth up to £30 million with deferred sales, the Premier League rebate to broadcasters, and of course, lost revenue as well. Of course, being 18th in the Premier League, that meant that in terms of prize money, we were £9 million down on where we were last season. And our owner last season put in another £28 million more. So that brings the club debt to max over £150 million. We also owe £76 million more in future payments on transfer instalments, but also we're going to have £18 million coming back our way. The cash flow position for 2021 financial year, though, it does look good, and we'll explain that throughout the show. So yeah, on the surface, it makes pretty grim reading. And there is a lot to discuss because on the surface, those figures are eye-watering. And if you look at the accounts on their own, Jeff, a lot of people go straight to the profit and loss. And without any context, that's £60 million for a club the size of AFC Bournemouth. It's actually quite frightening, isn't it?
Well, when you consider that for £4 million in debt, we had the administrators in, just over 10 years ago. And it just goes to show what a massive difference it's making to us having Max as the owner, and the solidity of Max is critical to the club in this period. I think we're in a number of difficult positions. We're half a Premier League team, but not getting the Premier League revenues, and we're playing in the Championship. So we're trying to obviously get back, but running the club as a Premier League club in the Championship is obviously makes no financial sense, really, and is unsustainable for a long period of time.
Hence the need for the parachute payments, of course, to sort of soften the blow. But it's quite interesting because a lot of our transfer activity had to happen after the financial year due to the fact that it was this extended break due to COVID. And that means that, you know, some of the transfer monies that we received would have been on the last financial year, making it look less bad. But Neil, it's quite interesting because every transfer window, the fans constantly moan about us not signing someone, and any tweet that they put out, someone saying, you know, come on, sign someone, announce someone, and it never happens. But then those same people this morning from Twitter are also moaning about this substantial loss that we've made. I suppose you can understand the difficult position that the board are in some ways.
Yeah. I suppose you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. I think the worrying thing for me when you look at the accounts is how many times. So it's fine. So we can look at it and say there's 50 million odd, I think, coming in from the transfers of what will predominantly be Nathan Ake and Callum Wilson. And if you can do that every year, as you know, some clubs like Brentford have always traditionally done, then it's not really a problem. So I think these accounts for me are less a story of last year's accounts, because you have got to add in the player sales we've had since, but it's more a story of how sustainable is the business when you look at it? And I'm sure we'll come on to talk about it when you haven't got a Nathan Ake to sell every year.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to take a look at what some of the key points on the accounts. I mean, I think they're fairly self-explanatory on the first sort of 1 or 2 pages. But yeah, I mean, coronavirus, it's had a massive impact on the club, not just for Bournemouth, but also for most clubs. Nearly all of them registering similar trends in their accounts, apart from Norwich, by the way, who did it differently by extending their financial year. So that's why if you make a comparison, you'll see that, you know, they've actually made a profit. So any player sales that they made could be absorbed into the last financial year. But to put it into context, Southampton, £75 million loss, Everton, 140, Brighton, 62, West Ham, 65. So why did COVID have an impact? Well, of course, the break meant that the 7 of the final matches happened after the financial year ended. Those transfers that were made after the financial year end, as we've alluded to, I mean, it would usually be a window which is ordinarily open for 6 weeks prior to the financial year end. All that happened afterwards. And quite a big thing is that due to the Premier League matches not being played before a specific date in a contract that they have with the broadcasters, it meant that Sky, BT and Amazon, they were all due a rebate from Premier League clubs, AFC Bournemouth's share of which was £7 million, which is quite a chunk. And of course, no fans, that has a huge impact as well. Wages, of course, remained paid. The club U-turned on furlough with that. The players didn't take a cut, but some senior members did, as we know, such as Eddie Howe, Jason Tindall and co. So, Jeff, a chunk of our loss, of course, is due to COVID. But what that means is that £18 million or so that was registered after the financial year, that will be recognised in the next set of figures. But, you know, you look at it now and you think £150 million, the owners into the club. That is a lot of money, isn't it?
It would make my eyes water if I was giving that much money away. I mean, not that I've got it, but you kind of think we know very little about Max. He keeps himself very private. We're not really sure how much he's worth. I mean, you look at that money that he's into the club for, and you think he's got to be a lot wealthier than some fans in the past have suggested. And I think that's true. I think he's got deep pockets. More than that, it's about where does his patience run out? Where does his passion stop? And the sort of plaything that we are, you know, begin to make a difference to him. And he thinks, you know, I've put so much money into this club that I'm going to walk away. We don't know. Right. We don't know him as a personality. We don't know him as a person. We've heard things about him. Everybody's got an opinion, I'm sure, who deals with him, and what you can read in those Cherries Trust minutes that we'll come on and talk about in more detail later is that Neil Blake and Richard Hughes seem supremely confident that he's going to be around for a long time, and he's invested deeply in the club. Yeah,
debt to an owner is either very worrying or not worrying at all. But without knowing the owner, you can't make that. It's really, really hard to actually lay down what it is. So it's we don't know what he's thinking, do we?
No, that's right. And that's the one thing that kind of worries me somewhat, because I gather he's got a very good relationship with the club and, well, with the senior members at the club, but we don't know anything about that. And obviously it is, you know, one of these things that if for some reason the relationship does sour, then, you know, we could be up shit creek. But they're saying that the assets that they've got on the pitch basically take care of that debt. I'm not sure they do when you work out the value, but, you know, we'll talk about that. But Jeff, obviously not playing at matches at Dean Court has a huge effect. You know,
yeah.
What kind of losses, does that mean for the club?
Well, it's massive. I mean, match day revenues with no fans. So arguably, we've got a small stadium, so the revenues we're getting from the fans and a small fan base. You know, let's not kid ourselves. We're not a super hugely well supported club. So okay, it's still going to make a difference. Not having fans coming into the game, what is the loss of that? It's probably $250,000 per game, I think, approximately. But then you've got to look at the other stuff. It's not just the tickets that people are paying money for. It's the club shop activity. It's corporate hospitality. It's commercial packages, sponsorships, events, all those things that would go on and contribute to running the club. And they're not there. Shop revenue must be down. I mean, I've spent a lot of time surfing the club shop in the period where we haven't been there, but it's not the same. And I'm sure fans going to games spend a lot of money in the shop.
Did you think, Neil, this is probably something that the club are now looking at thinking, thank God we've got a small stadium?
Well, I don't know. I mean, my worry is if I've read previously, so I think it's $250,000, isn't it, for income purely on tickets, and then I think there's about another 100,000 on top. So there's about 350,000. So if you times that by 25, 26 games, if you have a couple of cup games at home, you're still only talking about 7 or 8 million quid. And that, so when you look at, clubs like West Ham losing 50, 60 million, in terms of that, they will generate $1 million plus per game. And, we are a League One setup. So, hence why we're generating less. But the problem that we've got is when you look at that cost balance side on the P&L that came out today, just adding back in a full season of gate receipts, that 8 million that we'll get is just a drop in the ocean compared to the 170 million. Now, I know that 170 million won't be 170 million anymore. It was reflected the Premier League. But, how much will that come down over the course of a season? It isn't going to come down by much more than 40 or 50 million, I wouldn't have thought. And that's the problem that we've got. We're at a crossroads.
Yeah, absolutely. And this rebate to broadcasters, I think, AFC Bournemouth paid a share, which was about 7 million or so. But, with all the other Premier League clubs combined, it was, it must have been like over 100 million that, they had. In a day and age where there's lots of, bending over backwards for each other, lots of compassion and all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to contracts, Neil, like all that goes out the window, and there seems to be no leeway with that. And lo and behold, all that money was actually refunded by the various Premier League clubs. It sort of cuts deep a little bit, in amongst this climate of coronavirus, doesn't it?
It doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't. It doesn't, I guess, because the TV money is so obscenely huge that goes into football clubs that football clubs should still be able to budget with it and not spend every single penny of that TV money. And we should have been putting money aside for training grounds, stadiums. We shouldn't have been spending every single penny of it anyway. And then, obviously we would have just then not built the training ground and used the money from that to give back to the TV company. So yeah, I'm sure, could Sky survive without it? I'm sure they could. But at the same time, you can't really knock them for the amount of money they put into the game since the early 90s.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Jeff, Premier League prize money, £9 million down on the previous season. It is quite a chunk when you think about it, isn't it? And in a campaign where quite often our performances looked really abject, you sort of look at individual moments and individual performances, and you actually then start to see it on paper in terms of money. That hurts, doesn't it?
Do we have to go back there again, Sam? The pain of last season, it was it was really painful to watch as a fan, and that's just we're just football fans looking at it from an enjoying the game perspective. But actually, every point, every position in the league has a financial implication, and I'm not saying that the coaching staff and the players aren't aware of that. I'm sure they are, but what gets a team to care about it and to really play like their lives depend on it? Well, we didn't see enough of that last season, and that's partly why we're in the position we're in now. It is what it is. We're, as I said at the start, we're in this hybrid position. As Neil said, it's a crossroads. Where we are now is critical, because it's about the next couple of years, and the decisions that we're taking, the decisions the club is taking, matter. They matter enormously, and the performances of the players, they matter enormously, because arguably we have the strongest squad in the division this year, and they've underperformed. We're going to be in the playoffs if we play one these last few games, but if we don't, we've got another season of the Championship ahead of us. We might even have that if we get in the playoffs. We know who's to say we're going to win the playoffs. We're going to be probably 5th or 6th, which puts us at a disadvantage straight away. So the playing performances matter this season, but next season, even more important. If we don't make it this season, boy, the guys have got to deliver. And who's to say that the 3 clubs coming down? What if Newcastle are one of those clubs coming down and make the division stronger? What if Brighton are one of those clubs coming down and make the division stronger? You know, it's if it's Fulham, West Brom, and Sheffield United, I think we'll have a decent chance. But if a super big club is part of that, it's not going to be fun.
No, it's not. And on screen just now, you saw what you can see on Companies House. So that's the full financial report. It's very confusing, and we're trying to sort of muddle our way through it as best we possibly can. Now, here's something that is not nice to look at, and it is the Premier League table from last season, with AFC Bournemouth a point behind Aston Villa. Look at that. Now, Neil, we was just looking back with the help of Rob on Twitter. We've come to the conclusions that a single goal in one of AFC Bournemouth's 18 matches, so i.e. where a swing of 1 goal would have changed the outcome and made it a draw, that would have kept us up. Fine margins, eh?
Yeah, well, also a single goal in a game we didn't play, which was the Sheffield United Aston Villa game with the goal line technology turned off. I mean, I know that you can't extrapolate the rest of the season from that, but if you take that as an isolated incident and the rest of the season had stayed the same, then that someone who forgot to turn that on cost the club at the minimum of 110 million quid. But listen, I think you can always look back at any season, can't you? Because you can look at Josh King not getting his head on that far post cross at Newcastle, and all sorts of moments like that you can look back at. But you've also got to remember the ones that went for you. And I think it was a fair reflect. It was in our hands. It was a fair reflection of the season. We never turned up after the debacle. After COVID was just a debacle for most of those games. And to Jeff's point, I actually disagree with Jeff, because I think it doesn't really matter who came down, because Norwich were really poor last year. They came down bottom and they've romped the league this year. So I think whoever comes down, potentially could be good, because I don't think anyone thought Norwich, after the way they played in the Premier League last year, would finish ahead of us and Watford this year. But they'll clearly finish ahead of us and probably Watford as well. So, but no, I don't think you can look at individual moments. I just think it is what it is, and we finish where we deserved.
I think my point is, Neil, that there are going to be clubs that Sheffield United are in turmoil. They've got rebuilding ahead of them. That's pretty clear. West Brom, ditto. I think, Allardyce, whether he'll be there or not when they go down, I think it's another matter, and they've got a rebuild ahead of them. It's that third spot. If it's Fulham, they're a size of club that's similar to us, so we're competing on a level playing field. If it's Newcastle and they get bought by some, Sheikh, for example, which is potential, it's been talked about for years. Even with Ashley in charge, he could go and hire Benitez again, and they'd have 60,000 filling that ground, and they'd have a sort of scale that is difficult to compete with whoever you are in the Championship. That's all. Yeah,
fair enough.
So going forward then, obviously we all hope that we're going to get promoted this season, but the club will have 2 sets of forecasts, and we'll have to go with whichever one, depending on which division we're in. Now, if we stay in the Championship, of course, we'll have players that are surely going to go. Some might be retained, and players do have relegation clauses in their contracts. I mean, some, rumoured to be up to around 50%. But even still, Neil, it's going to be difficult, because you're going to be trying to attract players to play for relative peanuts compared to their colleagues that would have been former Premier League stars that will be on a lot more money than them. Yeah,
because the pure maths of the situation is we had a 170 million quid cost base last year and 120 million income. That's where the 50 million loss comes from. That income this year without player sales will be 50 odd million, which is the parachute payments because there's no match income. So there's a gap there of 120 million quid. Now we'll mask 50 million of that gap with the Ake, Wilson, etc. money a little bit more. So we've already got a 70 million loss, even, you know, when you take that into consideration. So, and then moving forward into the following year, the TV money drops by another 15 million, I think, to about 35, 40. So we will be, and I think we've already seen it this year, because who did we sign in the summer? Cameron Carton-Vickers on loan, Rocco Riquelme, I don't think it's a high earner. We haven't splashed any money out. Then we went and swapped 350,000 on Ben Pearson. And, you know, this is going to be the way that we move forward. So let's hope we've got a really good scouting network that are looking at those kind of players, because nothing wrong with, we're all happy with him, aren't we? And I think it shows why we didn't go and bid 5 million quid for an Ivan Toney or a player like that, probably because we knew these accounts probably now reveal all on stuff like that. We didn't have the 5 million quid to go and bid for an Ivan Toney. So yeah, I think we know that the pond that we're going to be fishing from for the next couple of years is going to be talented League One young players, or talented bottom half of the Championship.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong in that, Neil.
No.
You know, I think that's part of the DNA that got us promoted in the first place. Having players with points to prove. The transition is going to be tricky to manage. I totally agree. You look at the current squad and you think Danjuma, Brooks, Lerma probably looking elsewhere at the moment, or at least their agents probably looking elsewhere if things don't go right in the playoffs this season. And arguably they will get picked up in the summer. One thing that's been in our favour, funnily enough, has been COVID, because clubs haven't behaved as normally as they do in the transfer windows. You could say that's gone forward in that a lot of players like Brooks haven't been picked up, or bids haven't come in for them, because I think clubs have been a bit more conservative about their spending at the current time. It worked against us in that I think we should have got shot of Josh King in the summer to West Ham when we had the chance, and we lost 10 million quid at least on that, I think.
Yeah. So as we spoke about Max's involvement with the club, he's over 150 million into the club. And looking through the accounts, you look down and you see various repayment dates. But my understanding is because of the, you know, positive relationship they have, it's just a case you have to put down dates in some kind of loan agreement. Therefore, they don't actually have to be repaid. It's just a case of, you know, they'll write another one at the time, you know, to extend it. So it's not necessarily a concern when you see that. But I've got to say, though, yeah, harping back to what we were talking about, when one guy is responsible for, you know, pretty much the club as a whole, and we're talking about this, you know, the value of assets that we've got on the pitch, not necessarily tessellating with 150 million pounds. In a way, it's kind of like when I design a website for someone. I mean, you know, that's my trade, you know, that's what I do. And like, they've got me as a single point of contact, and I will say, okay, it will get done by this date. All they've got is me. They've got no one else that they can ask. It's just, you know, like I'm the person who's sort of responsible. And that's why I think fans may feel a little bit uncomfortable, because all we can do, Jeff, is just take the board's word for it. That, you know, that it's a positive relationship, all is okay, Max isn't going to go anywhere. And that's where we have problems, because Max is a very private person. Like, he doesn't speak publicly. So that's why we worry.
Football is a curious business product, different to a lot of industries, a lot of fields. We've got, we as customers place a huge amount of trust in the board to get it right, and the players who are ultimately delivering part of that product, probably the biggest, most important part of that product that they make, that they actually deliver a good quality product that succeeds. And everything is variable. You know, it's unpredictable. It's prone to, I mean, we all have huge opinions of negativity after we put in a crap performance like we did against Barnsley in that second half. But 2 days later, we completely changed our mind again, because they turn up at Swansea and win 3-0, and it's complete opposite. Tell me another business where it works like that, where 2 days later, you're completely, flying high. Whereas the two days previously, it was the quality was, you'd have thought, I'm walking away. I'm never going to support this team again or be a customer again. It's bizarre. The whole thing is flipping bizarre. And yet, fundamentally, as customers, we've got a loyalty that the club rely on to support them and keep coming back for more, in spite of the variability of the product. Where the trust at the moment is really important is we have to trust that the owner's going to stick with it and continue to put his money in to bankroll the club through these difficult times until we get back to the Premier League, or what? I'm not sure what the plan B is if we don't get back in a couple of seasons. That's something to be concerned about. And underneath him, we have to have utter confidence in the management at the club that they will do the right thing. And we're taking it all on trust. They're not like politicians. We can't vote them out.
No. And we are over invested in it as well, because football's not a product. It's a drug, isn't it? And Max is our dealer, and we don't know if he's going to go to prison. We're without our drug. That's basically what it is. If we all looking at the debt, we're all worrying about it. If you shop at Asda and Asda go into massive debt, you don't worry about it, because if they go pop, you just go shop at Sainsbury's, isn't it? So none of us work for the club, but we're over invested in it. That's why these sort of things worry us so much.
Well, perhaps we can just take Eddie Mitchell's advice and just go and support that team up the road, Neil. That's what we can do, eh? No one would ever want to do that.
Yeah. More chance of supporting Weymouth, I think. Than
So, let's £150 million. I mean, we're all thankful to Max that's got us to where we are. Our squad value at the moment, Neil, do you think it's anywhere near that? I mean, I find it quite difficult to you kind of add it all together and think it comes anywhere near to that. And it's quite worrying to place all your, I wouldn't say trust, but, all your value of kind of what you've got based on, these assets that could play one day and then snap their ACL the next and be out for 6-7 months or whatever.
Yeah, well, it is. And then also you've got the fact that as the team's performance drops, so the value of the players on it drop. It's just like a very, very large game of Football Manager. So you look at, what is... David Brooks was a player who was being spoken about as a £40 million player a year and a half ago. I think you would be lucky to get 12 or 13 million from him on current form. That's not his fault. He's suffered with injuries and he's playing in a team that's not got much form. And when he comes into it, he hasn't looked as good as he has previously. Solanke isn't worth the 20 million quid that we bought for him as an 11 goal a season target man that tries hard. So if you start looking through the squad, I think signing Philip Billing is like inviting Miss Marple round for dinner, isn't it? In terms of the outcome is never good for any club. So it's I would struggle to say the true value of the squad in COVID times is anywhere near 150 million quid. It'd be a long way off that.
To add to that, I think the players in the Championship have less for value than if they were in the Premier League. If you're a Championship player, a Premier League club ain't going to pay the same salary they would for a player from another Premier League club, and that's just a fact. And I think it's part of that curious situation we're in, where we're a part Premier League club, but in the Championship, that it's not just the players who are on huge salaries. I'm sure a lot of the staff and the management are on Premier League salaries, but here we are in the Championship, and I think you can look at that. You can see that in the accounts. The wage bill ain't just about the players. It's about the huge amount of staff that we've got. We've got the setup of a Premier League club still, but where are we? How long is that sustainable? Yeah,
it said something like 620 staff members or something. It's like, wow, really? I mean, that sounds a lot, but yeah. So there we are. I mean, that's where we're at in terms of parachute payments. People have been asking how much we get. I think it's 46 million for the first year. After the next season, it goes down to 30 odd, and then 16 million for the third year. So obviously wages need to come down with that. I mean, wages versus turnover, I think it's like 112%. So obviously that all need to change. And people have also been asking about FFP on Twitter as well. it's not an issue for the next 2 seasons. I think Premier League status, previous Premier League status, is taken into account, but for 2 years we've got almost a sort of period of grace, so to speak. And what the situation with COVID means, that our player sales happening after the end of the last financial year, means for next year our profit and loss will actually look pretty good. So it'll be interesting to see where we're at, and hopefully Max should be putting no more money into the club. I mean, if it was being well run, that should be the case, but we'll have to see. So the bottom line is, yeah, there's concern, but it's not as bad as the headlines suggest. I mean, yeah, you're looking at it, £60 million loss, probably half that due to COVID. Even still, it's pretty bad, but you look at the assets that we've got out there, he can claw some of it back. Who knows? I mean, the club's fairly stable because of the assets that we've got on the pitch, but it was a rough trading period, and what we're seeing here is the perfect storm of relegation added to COVID as well. Max, in terms of the future, he certainly needs to keep the business running and going in order to protect his assets. So I think we can breathe a sigh of relief with regards to that. But obviously, yeah, promotion is going to be huge for us this season, and might help to make a drip or two of sweat be taken away from the foreheads of senior figures at the club. Right, from that, we'll talk about the minutes from the board-to-board meeting last week between the Cherries Trust and the AFC Bournemouth board. Jeff, did you manage to take a look?
Yep, took a look. There was a lot of dead batting some of those questions. I think looking at the accounts, we've actually had more insight into what's going on than I think they got through some of their questions and some of the answers they received.
Yeah, that could well be said. I mean, some of the answers that I've been reading, I mean, some people have said elite question dodging. That is something that is a theme that you can sort of see throughout some of the questions. So these are the type of topics that were talked about. The training ground. Neil Blake said that the training centre project is still on hold and that there's no timescale in place for contractors to move back onto the site. The current situation with COVID, it continues to be a big driving factor in this. He also reiterated the club's plans to build a training centre and have a Category 2 academy, stating that this is a way of sustaining a future. Also spoke about the stadium. Neil Blake explained that the lease on the Vitality Stadium expires in 2030 and that the club remains in constant dialogue and has a good relationship with Structure Dean. There are also discussions on the disabled facilities at the club as well. Almost criticism via the questions, but it seemed to be responded with a way of, well, actually, we're the best. And it quoted various surveys that were done across the Premier League. So is that a sufficient answer? I'm sure some people will think not. Other people might think it is. Now, Woodgate's appointment. Got to say, this one was really interesting. Did you see it? I mean, did you read that bit, Neil?
Yes. I mean, the whole thing to me looked like classic deflection from the fact that they messed up the whole procedure. I mean, one of the things we didn't talk about on the accounts as well is it looks, there's a named director that got paid 1.4 million pounds last year, so which is an extraordinary amount of cash. To put it in perspective, I think Sainsbury's chief executive basic salaries are just short of 900,000. So they've got a 28 billion turnover. So in terms of the caliber of what we're getting for our money, I've never been over convinced that we're getting anywhere near the caliber we should get for that level of money. And I think when you look at the whole botched Jonathan Woodgate appointment, we covered it on here before. Yes, he makes the point that the team didn't suffer during the transition and they only lost one game, and I guess that's true. But football's a game that's played on a longer period than that, and momentum, and the bottom line is they keep saying that they looked at it and Jonathan Woodgate was the best man for the job, and if that is the case, and we believe that, then you give him a 2 or 3 year contract. So the players know where they stand. So quite clearly, the two things have never added up. Either Jonathan Woodgate is the best man for the job, in which case you give him a 2 year contract and the players then know who they're playing for the next 2 years, or he isn't the best man for the job. and you should have just given it him as a caretaker at the end of the season and say you were going to look for someone else. Because in reality, that's what he is. He's caretaking this to the end of the season.
Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, we look back on that time where we lost 4 defeats in a row under Jason Tindall, and it looked like the wheels were not only coming off, but they were coming off very rapidly indeed, and something needed to be done. I wasn't against Tindall's departure at the time because I felt it was getting to a critical point where we needed to stop that slide, and he didn't seem to be up to the challenge. He looked like a rabbit lost in the headlights when the pressure was building on him. Now that we've got Woodgate, what the club seem to have done is redrawn what actually happened to suit a version of events that we just can see through it. You know, you can see what happened. Woodgate came in as an actual replacement for the coach he went to Newcastle. I can't remember his name now. Gosh, the man who introduced 5 at the back to us. Anyway, whatever. You know, and
he's done really well at Newcastle, though. To be fair to him,
yeah,
Graham Jones, yeah,
Graham Jones. That's right. So we got Woodgate in as a head coach to replace him, but actually then to give him the manager's job and say that he's the best candidate for it when all they were doing was observing him on the training pitch and just seeing what was going on. I mean, it's not the truth. Sorry, but it ain't. And
it's, you know what? It sounds like something that the dodgy member of Parliament off Little Britain would have said while standing next to his beleaguered wife, who's just stood there smiling, and he's providing all these explanations of, you know, whatever he did. But this whole thing that, you know, like they interviewed all these world-class candidates and then they were indirectly interviewing him. He didn't realise it. It sounded all a bit.
Yeah, no, I mean it's just the whole thing is nonsense. It's ridicule. They clearly thought they had someone else, or they were going for someone else. It fell through, and then I think they probably took the right decision, which is, oh God, do we want to start another 3-week recruitment period? But, you know, so I think the decision was right that they took once they'd failed to get who they wanted to get. But just come out and you know, don't try and baffle us with the fact that Jonathan Woodgate was the person that you were looking for. It's just PR spin. And like I say, they'd have given him a 2-year contract if that was the case.
Yeah, I think people have made mistakes, and I think sometimes, you know, in my opinion, I think it's quite nice to hold your hands up to that. But then when you do that, sometimes people think like your job should be gone as a result of it. So that's why people don't ever hold their hands up. Hence these like round the houses explanations.
Yeah, part of their explanation you can agree with. You know, that it would have been incredibly disruptive to bring in a new coach and all his own people and kick out all the coaches we've currently got and totally redesign how the team functions. And I completely get that, but just be a bit more honest with us, and I think we'd all feel a lot better about the people running the club.
And also, we've made the same mistake twice, and that's a bit. When someone's being paid the money that he's being paid, you shouldn't make a basic mistake twice. So clearly, I think we could all see that if you weren't to keep Eddie, and that was mistake number one. They had a week to keep Eddie in the building when he went into that negotiation wanting to stay. They couldn't do that. Then there was absolutely no point in appointing the lesser half of that management duo that had gone through the sort of the relegation and the staleness. That was the time to have gone and got someone and took the club in a new direction. They didn't do that. But they appointed someone that had no managerial experience when this is the most important year, probably, you know, to get right. And as the accounts we just demonstrated, so they've then repeated that with a guy who won 8 games for a championship club and lost his job the time before. So they've made the same mistake twice, and that's when you just think inexcusable.
Neil Blake also asked for the Cherries Trust to remember the journey of the football club, and that everyone associated is very fortunate to have an owner who's invested such a substantial amount of money to bring in success over the years. He continued that if the club finishes outside of the playoff places this season, he will be very disappointed, but argued that it would still likely be the 7th highest finish in the club's history. So that's all right then, Neil.
Well, 7th highest finish with the club's probably second best squad ever. So relative to the resources, the amount of money that's been put in, the playing squad that took the pitch, that were as good as Norwich's, as we know, because we beat them fairly comfortably, and on paper we've got a squad as good as theirs. It's just simply not good enough. But that's classic PR, and that's papering over the cracks. Now, he's right. We wouldn't be where we are without Max, but then Max wouldn't have been where he was without Eddie. So I'd see later on they were taking the credit for the player sales that they brought in. I don't think we've discussed the players and how they were found, and they came to play for Eddie Howe. That's at the end of the day, and he found and signed most of them. So I don't buy it at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, I'd prefer to hear a response that is something along the lines of, look, we're disappointed at how this season is going. We're doing a lot of work behind the scenes to get the club right, to get the players right, to be back in the Premier League. That's what we're aiming for, but we are disappointed with how things are going this season. Don't try and sugarcoat it by saying that it's a really good level of finish.
And that we should be grateful.
We're not. We can see we're not stupid. I'm sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think also they pointed to the club's financial stability as well, and said words to the extent that Max Denham will do everything that he can to continue its success. And towards the end of the accounts as well, it alludes to that as well, saying that, he's in it for the long run, apparently.
And don't get me wrong, we're all grateful. We're all grateful for Max. We've been on an amazing journey, and we've been spoiled rotten, particularly if you're, the age of Neil and me, where you've been through several administrations, several points deductions. You've seen, buckets filled with money at the Winter Gardens, all that sort of stuff. You know how different it's been these last 5 years, and that is down to the investment and the stability that Max has brought to the club. And we are rare and privileged to have that, because you can get some millionaire owners who are complete nutcases out there as well. So we're grateful for that. We want it to continue. We just would appreciate a degree of honesty, a little bit more transparency, and the two-way relationship that fans should have with their club. You got to talk to us like we're grown-ups, not like we're not.
And this video by any means is not a two-footed challenge on anyone at the club whatsoever. We certainly appreciate that you do put in a lot of work, but all we want as football fans is the highest caliber of personnel at every level, from the players to the manager, right up through to the director of football and beyond that as well. And judging by some of the comments that were released to the Cherries Trust in that meeting, I don't know, it came across a little bit questionable. However, we don't doubt that you all want the best for this football club, and hopefully it can all be realised on the pitch, because that's where everything happens, and we need to put in a shift for these last few games. And if we got to the Premier League, Jeff, it would be it would feel like sort of daylight robbery in many ways.
Yeah, I think one of the dangers that we faced on the pitch this season is that players who've tasted what the promised land of playing in the Premier League is all about, suddenly playing in the Championship, they haven't got the same appetite or hunger or passion for it. And I wonder whether that's a similar thing for the management, whether they've all enjoyed being part of that Premier League bandwagon, ridden the glory. And maybe I'd hate to say it, again, don't want to be critical, don't know enough, but is there complacency? Is there a little bit of arrogance? We need to see the hard work continue from everybody. We expect that. That's the only way you're going to get back to where you were.
Yeah. Everyone's got paid too much. The desire isn't there. It's really hard to find the desire when you don't have to fight for it, or you're not, everyone's got a wage that more than comfortably sets them up for life. You can see that when you see, clubs like Barnsley, where they're on the journey that we were on 7 years ago with the likes of Mark Pugh and Simon Francis and players that were just desperate to have one shot at the big time, and owners and everyone throughout the club that really wanted the personal and financial success that came with it, and it's blatantly missing at all levels at the moment.
But we trust you to deliver, so flipping deliver it.
Come on, lads. Come on, let's have it. Let's end on a positive. We always like to do that. Right then. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comments. We would love to hear from you. Keep liking our videos. We really appreciate it. More content is coming out during the week. And of course, Friday, we're up against the Borough. Should be an interesting one. Hopefully, Jonathan Woodgate can get one over his former club, eh? See you in the next video. Up the Cherries.